I'm here to speak in Brett Scott's place. I forget the exact topic of his talk, but I've listened to him a lot, and I'll be saying the kinds of things that he says sometimes.
Commodity, credit, and collectibles was the title.
Okay. So the title of my talk is slightly different, The Fundamentals of Tokenomics Part 2. Because we heard a lot from the Token Academy, but not really about tokenomics and what is it. And I want to explore with you what is a token right from the start. Because I see in the discourse of the blockchain and cryptocurrencies a very shallow misreading of what is actually going on at the lowest level. So we'll explore that today with the idea of what is a token. I want to premise everything as well by saying that what I'm interested in is the function of exchange. You're probably aware that many people say that money has three functions. The medium of exchange function and the store of value function, and they all get mixed up. And it's very confusing, and normal economists don't distinguish between them or use accurate language around that at all. Do you want to say something, Julio? Okay, you're just... So I'm interested in the medium of exchange function only. To me, what money does and why we need to organize around money is to make the medium of exchange. The store of value function is in a sense boring. You can just get a piece of gold and keep it, and that serves the store of value function. Or if not gold, anything else. Some items go up in value over time, some you need to pay to maintain. But it's not fair and right to use the special thing which is everybody needs to serve the function of a medium exchange. It's not right. It screws with the economy and the tokenomics if you take the medium of exchange out of circulation and say, well, I'm just going to keep this until I don't know when. Okay, well, you could do it. It wouldn't make much difference. But actually, you've got a whole class of elites or wealth hoarders or trillionaires who are doing that to the economy right now. And so however much money they issue, there's still a shortage of it because it just goes into the tax havens. It's not available to facilitate exchange and the economy. So when I talk about money, and actually I try not to use the word money too much because nobody knows what it means, or everybody has a different idea about it. I try to talk about tokens, contracts, or just the medium of exchange, so that we understand the function that we want to put it to. So I'm going to invite two previously arranged volunteers to come and help with a demonstration. I want you to imagine that these volunteers are economic actors. That means that they produce stuff that is valuable and generally wanted in the economy, but they also need stuff. They need stuff to consume for themselves, to keep their families alive, and they also need raw materials. And so each of them is, they're economic actors in the sense that they are producing and consuming. And when we talk about a medium of exchange, the exchange that we're talking about is their need to produce and to consume different things. What they're exchanging is a quantity of stuff that they produce for a quantity of stuff that they need. And it's not like a direct barter exchange, but it is an exchange with the rest of the economy. And so all of us are doing that. We're all producing and we're all consuming, and so we have this exchange relationship with the rest of the economy. And we can use a medium of exchange to make that process easier. So we're not talking here about saving the money to exchange at an indefinite moment later in the future. So what do you produce, Scott?
Coffee.
Coffee, brilliant. And what do you produce?
Maybe water.
water.
Yeah.
Might not be the best example.
Flowers.
You can produce flowers, that's fine.
Okay.
I want to shrink the whole economy down to 2 producers and assume that they meet each other's needs by exchanging. But you can imagine that the line here is infinitely long, or even that it might have loops in it. And we need to pass objects along the line, and then we need to pass money the other way. I just want to say something else in acknowledgement of Grace, because she doesn't believe, don't let me put words in your mouth, Grace.
You probably got it right.
Thank you very much.
I'm listening.
Grace doesn't believe that the whole paradigm of exchange is what we need to be doing. So that,
That's an accurate representation of my opinion.
thank you. So my theory of change is that we need to do exchange better, and we need to separate exchange from the store of value. And that will free us up to produce, and it will bring economic power to producers instead of to banks who just make the money. Grace would like to see something outside of the paradigm of exchange. She wants to move into the gift economy.
That's inaccurate.
Okay,
I wouldn't call it gift economy.
okay. But something
Outside the area of exchange.
outside the area of exchange. So a whole different theory and a different approach, and a different tokenomics would be implied by that if there were tokens. So that's the kind of limitation in which I'm working. All of my work and thought has been, how do we do exchange better? And that might not be what you are trying to achieve. It might not be your theory of change. But this is how I understand the money. So let's begin the simulation. This piece of rock is extremely valuable and desirable. Everybody wants it. And actually, I had to do a lot of work to go and get this piece of rock. And I did the work because I know that everybody wants it. So I'm kind of doing the economy a service. I had to go through purification processes, and I had to get it certified. But anyway, because I want this coffee, I'm going to try to exchange this piece of rock with the coffee producer. And let's see what happens. Mr. Coffee Producer, before you drink all the coffee, would you accept this piece of rock in exchange for some coffee?
Sure.
Maybe another cup. Sure. Why would you accept it? It's just a piece of rock.
It's super valuable,
Oh,
and
it's
everybody wants it, and
Okay.
I know that I can get what I need with it.
Uh-huh. Go on then, see if you can get what you need with it.
Hey, Mr. Flower Producer, got this shiny rock. Can you give me some of them flowers?
If I take it, would you accept it back?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Super valuable. Look at it.
Okay, and you're part of the economy, right?
Doesn't matter about me, I'm just the issuer.
Okay.
That's all right. Hide me over.
Okay. Yeah, how much coffee I can get?
No, not that question.
Okay.
Everything is 1 unit of value.
Okay, 1 unit, okay. Yeah, if you would accept, you will accept it back? Yes, I will accept it now.
All right, great. There's
Okay.
your rock.
And so you can see that with this, the rock will go all the way down the line. Eventually, probably somebody will use the rock or lock it away, and it will stop circulating. And then they'll say, hey, Mr. Rock Miner, can we have another piece of rock? So as people accumulate wealth in the form of gold, you need a new source of the medium of exchange. Okay, let's try with a different thing. Now, I couldn't be bothered to mine gold, so I've mined this token. It was very, very easy. I just had to press a button. And I've got 1 million, billion, trillion, quadrillion of these, but I'm maybe just keeping them to one side. So I'm looking for some coffee. Would you accept this token from me for your coffee?
What's this shit coin?
No, it's not a shit coin. Look, it's painted red. I had to work to do this. I've got a whole mining algorithm going on behind me, like mining.
Algorithm.
Yeah. And you should accept it because, sorry, I need a token engineer. Any token engineers, tell me why he should accept this token. Math.
We'll accept that for now.
Okay, accept it because one day that token is going to be really valuable. You remember Bitcoin? That's like the new Bitcoin.
Sure. You said you have a quadrillion of them.
Yeah, because they're going to be really desired. So let's see if you can spend it any further on.
So, flower producer, you want some shitcoins?
Actually, no, but I already sell my flowers. Can I?
No, we reset.
Yeah, we were.
Oh, yeah, it's reset. Okay.
And I'll have the rock back, thank you very much.
Because this is also something.
This guy says these things are going to be really valuable. I don't know if I believe him or not, but I need some flowers, so
I don't know. You would accept it back?
I guess.
Then we can just exchange coffee and flowers, maybe.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay, the break simulation, stop there.
Okay.
You're representing the whole economy in which the direct barter isn't really
Okay,
possible.
okay, sorry.
It's just a principle of exchange.
So,
So you see the difficulty with which the coin propagated into the economy. Because every time you want to move a token along, you have to move it with the story. And the story has to be convincing. And also the value of the token changes over time, so you don't really know what it's worth.
Question?
Yeah.
Why was the story that it was going to go up in value? Since that is a story that people tell, but
Yeah.
I don't know that it's unique to the idea of token, simply because token is representation, and in this case, obviously, if you want to enable exchange, then it should be a representation of actually the same thing that the rock represented, which was the future, like use, like the acceptance in the future.
See, the rock doesn't represent anything other than being a rock. That kind
No,
of
you use
well-
it as a
It's a
representation
commodity,
because
right?
they discussed, and he wanted to know whether it represented something that would allow him to make an exchange in the future, which is totally appropriate, is
So
what you said.
we know that everyone wants the rock. There's a universal culture and expectation.
But that, I think that's, you can look at it that way, but if you flip it around, why do they want the rock? Then you actually get into the meat of it. Because ultimately I accept the rock if I know that with this rock I can do other things. This is why I accept
we
you
covered
rock.
that point in
Yeah.
the exchange.
What, sorry?
I said that as a part of
Okay,
the
yeah, sorry.
action.
That was when he said, yes, I would accept the rock back. I'm not trying to pass on some shitty goods. I think this is valuable. I want to use it as a medium of exchange, and you can give it back to me later on.
I don't think we're disagreeing, I just think the point I was asking
Mhm.
is you premised the first thing, the token,
Yeah.
with the idea that, oh, this thing's gonna go up in value, and I'm not just discounting the fact
Well,
that a lot of people do that.
There are many stories, but they're all stories.
I agree with you, there are many stories,
I disagree.
but, okay, I'm going to accept that there are many stories, but I'm going to argue that not all stories are, this thing will go up in value.
Yeah.
One such story
Yeah.
is, we all agree that this thing is valuable.
Who's
the
we?
first one is
We?
also an example of such a story.
Do you mean we, everyone in the world, or we, the followers of the issuer of the coin?
I mean the people who are participating in the network of exchange that we are describing.
Okay, so that would be the followers of the issuer of the coin. That would be the network of exchange around that coin.
I will accept that as long as it includes mutual credit systems
Well,
where the issuers include the people who are participating.
We're getting to mutual credit.
I'm trying to like follow the assumption sets, and I think my reason for bringing it up is because in this stage of the simulation, we made this assumption about going up in value, and I will grant you, people tell that story all the time.
Yeah.
But I think that it is a story, and that it's really not a great story, but you're making a point here for exchange, but that the idea that, I guess maybe it partially is the characterization of the token, at least in what I would consider definition of a token as a representation of something else,
Mhm.
that we can have it as a representation of this thing that will go up in value,
Yeah.
or as a representation of this exchange phenomena that was demonstrated earlier.
Uh-huh.
So maybe it's semantics, but I'm just like trying to untangle them a little bit.
Okay, let's do this again and unpack it a bit more. So I'm not going to telling the story that it will go up in value. I'm telling the story that this token is like a share in my business, and I'm making some fantastic crypto stuff. So there's a risk involved. It will change in value, but if you want to accept equity in my company, or the crypto equivalent of equity, would you accept this token? Of course, there isn't a lot of law at the moment that obliges me to do anything with this token. It's still just a story.
See, that's a variant of the other story, the one with a risk and reward profile,
Yeah.
rather than something that looks like, again, the first example,
Mhm.
my future expectation that you will accept it for the exchange of goods and services. So I'm literally, I think,
Mhm.
agreeing with you completely about the function
Yeah.
of the money, but I'm concerned about the characterization of a token as necessarily not that thing.
Can we move on?
Okay,
I'm
yeah,
aware of
I-
these
I will
issues.
say-
Pardon?
I think the difference between a token and stone is some stone has use value, token is a placeholder for something that might have use value, but as we don't have for these tokens, or you didn't mention any reserve of use value, things like stones for the tokens.
Yeah.
You just have.
It's not a promise for a stone.
They will be accepted for something that has use value. Stone has use value, you can throw it.
The point is that what goes behind the token is my story about it. Whether it's that it will go up in value, whether it's risk, it's a story that emanates from me, and him over there, he doesn't really know it, or he doesn't know whether to believe it. So the token will circulate with difficulty. And we've talked about how the token came into circulation. Well, I spent it. But what happens at the other end of the chain?
I mean, like the same question like before, you would accept it back?
Well, let's say you've accepted it.
Huh?
Let's say you've accepted it.
Ah,
And there's an assumption that this chain goes to infinity, with goods coming that way and tokens or money going that way. But maybe that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think that the point is that my question is always if I can spend this with him,
Yeah.
and if I ask him, he would accept it back, and the value of this is not secure.
Mm-hmm.
Is not.
So the answer is maybe.
His answer would be always I don't know,
Yeah.
and I think that is what breaks the chain.
What I meant
I guess.
to highlight is that at the end of the chain, somebody somewhere is going to accept the token and give the goods and not be able to spend the token. You can't guarantee that the token will just keep going on down that chain, facilitating exchange. And what happens at the end of the chain is that somebody is given goods and the exchange does not complete because they can't get anyone to accept the token. So there's a kind of injustice here. There's me at one end of the chain, and I give a worthless token and accept worthful goods and services, and the guy at the other end of the chain is on the other end of that exchange, except it's not an exchange because the token is worthless. So the net result is that he's given me his products for nothing, just through a lot of intermediaries. Yes?
That's a wonderful way of putting the point, and I like the point that you make that stories are integral to process of exchange. And it's interesting that perhaps we should be thinking more along stories that are linked amongst us, maybe to the point of considering, is there a set of universal basic obligations that we can...
We are coming to that with the third token item of currency, whatever.
Another
Yeah?
I agree with the importance of the stories in the monetary systems, but
Mhm.
why the stone is not included in this?
In the stories,
Everybody knows the story already.
it's like a universal belief.
Yeah, it also
Yeah, but it's not a real case because in history, now there is no universal agreed value on anything.
The dollar.
It
Yeah,
could change.
yeah.
It could change.
I mean,
That's why I asked.
And you survive to
Do
the
this
zero and
Can we come back and you can discuss all of this for the rest of the week? I hope you do. But let me finish before everyone gets tired and bored. So this is another kind of token. I call it a ring because it comes back to me. When I issue the token, I issue with it at the same time the guarantee that I will accept the token in exchange for whatever I happen to produce, let's say rocks. So I need some equipment to go and produce my rocks. I'm going to go to the equipment producer, like my workers need coffee, and will you accept this ring token in exchange for coffee that will help me to produce my goods and services?
great.
That's the right answer.
What can I do with that?
What you can do with it is you can get rocks at a later date from me.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Very simple.
See if it works with him.
Hey, this is good for that guy's rocks.
Okay.
Like his flowers.
Okay.
There you go. Good.
Thank you.
But it's not that he actually needs rocks.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. But anyway, like you are going to accept this back, right? Because you want rocks, so I can buy coffee
Exactly.
from you.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Do you know who I am?
The rock producer.
Do you trust my promise?
I trust him that he's accepting your promise.
Okay. Normally, somebody who's issuing credit needs to be able to assure the rest of the community that they will be able to redeem it. And that's a bit like telling the story in tokenomics. But the difference is that the assurance comes from the fact that I'm actually producing rocks that people actually want. And that's why the ring can go back around the economy, and one day when somebody needs rocks, they'll come to me with the ring, and I will happily accept the ring back and give them the rocks that I've produced. And so in that way that we have cooperated. What they've done actually, the economy, they gave me the credit I needed to produce the rocks, because they gave me the coffee for my workers without really accepting any payment, but they did it for the promise of the produce at the end of the day. So the ring is a kind of credit, and I get to issue it. Actually, it's interest-free credit. It's not credit that I got from the bank, and I have to pay the bank to get the credit. It's credit that I issued into the economy. The economy circulated it all the time, trusting that I'm going to produce a rock and that they will want a rock at the end of the day. And then the credit comes back to me. There's actually no money. Unless you think this is a token, or if you think it's money, there was no money involved in that transaction. Just a token that circulated temporarily and came back to me. So I'm going to illustrate this in a different way, because it's really, really, really important. Instead of a ring, this time, I'm going to issue an IOU, a piece of paper, a contract. It says, I ring you, and the value is 1. And the thing about IOUs, they're not like tokens. Tokens have been very reified. Even when you make a digital token, everyone thinks that the token is a thing. And you build a whole discipline of tokenomics premised on this thing, but you can't really define what it is in many ways. This is not like a thing, because it starts with no existence, and then you make an impulse, and it splits into something that looks like a thing and something that looks like the anti-thing, right? This is the, I'd have to get this right. This is my promise that I will redeem something. I'm going to, hang on, no, it's not me, I'm the banker. You're issuing this.
Okay.
So you're going to pay for the thing with that, but then there's also this label.
Thank you for this.
Oh no, it doesn't. Can you hold that down?
Oh, sure.
while this is circulating in the economy, can you circulate it? Everybody can see that he issued it and he's going to redeem it, and there's a contract. It could be in the law, it could be in the social consciousness, but the accounting is there that says that that token is worth something because it has an anti-token here and it will get cancelled out. An anti-token, that's a good thing. And this anti-token is stuck to his forehead by us. Like, it's not a token that he can just get rid of because it's negative. It's not an asset, it's a liability. And the liabilities are imposed on him by the community, or we keep a record that we know who he is, he owes the community.
Is he the banker or you're the banker?
He's just issued his own credit.
Okay.
So where does that leave us? So you've got this thing, it looks like a token because it's an asset with a positive value, but in this case it corresponds to a negative value, and after the token has been around the economy, it'll come back. Yeah, let's skip that bit.
Yeah, right.
It'll come back. The interesting part is the redemption. And what happens on redemption when Scott owes Scott 1? Right. The token disappears back into the ether from which it came. The contract is fulfilled, the vouchers, IOU, is redeemed. And so, back to the circle, you have a full life cycle of money. It starts with an impulse, it splits into two, one half stays still, the other half goes around and comes back, and then it cancels out.
Yep.
Just one more illustration of this. I wasn't able to get hold of a rope, but you can imagine what will happen if we have a rope. I was actually going to do this with Tio. There's a rope between us. Imagine it's horizontal. And I do this. And you see the wave propagating all the way along to here. Now the wave is like a token going through the economy. And you can see that it has a positive value. And that's what everybody's looking at with the money. But because we think of it as a wave, we know that it could not exist as a positive value without the negative value going underneath. So in this example, the positive and the negative sort of propagate together, or one after the other, through the economy. They get to the other end and they sort of cancel each other out. And the problem with the commodity view of money is that you're only looking at the top side of the wave. And what happens on the bottom side of the wave is very, very important. A lot of people think that the fiat money we have today is issued by the government. This isn't really the topic of my talk, but understand that the fiat money is issued, in the accounting books, it's credit that the government issues. But you can also think of it as a pure token, because when the government owes money, it's different to when everyone else owes money. So you've got some notes, imagine the notes being printed and spent into the economy. But what happens then is the banks take the notes and they use them as collateral to issue their own credit. And so according to different accounts, it could be 90% of the circulating money, or other accounts 97%, is actually this bank credit that wasn't issued by the government at all. And in the crypto sphere, they don't talk about the banks. It's all about, we hate the government is irresponsible, the government is printing money, but you're not seeing the power of the banking system to create the money. And they have other privileges and other effects on the economy. And the government is the smallest player these days in that process. And when the bank creates money, it does it as a debt. It can't do any other way. And so it happens when you take an overdraft or a loan from the bank keeps the negative balance on its balance sheet, kind of in your name, and the positive balance circulates around. And the net result is actually no money is created. There's only IOUs that have to be cancelled out at the end of the day. So think to yourself, is that fiat money? What do we mean when we talk about fiat money? Is it the government, which is issuing as much IOUs as it likes, that it doesn't have to redeem, but actually that's only the notes and coins? Or is fiat money the banks issuing as much credit as it likes, but which should be redeemed, cancelled out at some point? And when you talk about all the debt in the world, that's the debt we're talking about, and it's unpayable. It's unpayable because people are not allowing it to be circulated and used as a medium of exchange. They're taking half of that check, half of that IOU, and they're putting it in a tax haven. And that leaves all the other people who borrowed the money into circulation, they are unable to repay their debts because the money is locked away. It's not circulating. Yes?
First, very much appreciate the review of how credit money works, because I agree lots of people aren't aware. What I was hoping to do was examine the graph, the injustice you pointed out at the beginning, around the lack of balance in the prosumers, the consumption production, because at least, like, I think the most compelling thing that you said at the beginning was an observation about the structure of the net imbalance in that graph producing a lot of this injustice, and I'm actually kind of curious about how, whether it's the credit form of money or any representation of exchange, like, can help address underlying imbalances in the structure of that production consumption graph, right? Because in the example with the line where it went one way, we had problems because it went and it kind of ended, and you fixed it actually by closing it. You made a graph that was cyclic. And so, you know, obviously the real economic networks are complex and they are cyclic, but very imbalanced. And I'm curious about the extent to that injustice that creates, and to your point, the accumulation on the side of the, let's say, the net consumers of the medium of exchange, who are at least seen as the net.
The medium of exchange is not consumed.
Well, they're accumulated in your example with the banks,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
The people who hoard it.
Yeah.
So they're collecting it. We won't say consume.
Okay.
They're collecting it.
Yeah.
They are accumulating a stockpile, and there are other places that are being starved of what they need to circulate. And so, great argument for sort of mutual credit, being able to prevent that starving. Totally with you. But I still think that you demonstrated a really important fundamental injustice in the extreme imbalance in the structure of that graph. And so, like, if you're willing, I'd like to hear sort of your thoughts on how we can address that.
Okay, we're in the paradigm of exchange. In reality, exchange is never exact. People do not consume the exact amount that they produce. And so the whole paradigm of exchange, when you frame it like that, is somewhat artificial. It's an approximation that helps us to build systems. In order for the systems to really work properly, you need to ensure that people are producing as much as they're consuming, or that they're giving away things like off the books, or receiving things off the books. I wasn't going to get into it in this session, but my proposal for how that should work is not through tokenomics, because there's a kind of view that you can automate that with exchange rates. You can say if somebody's producing a lot more than they consume, that means they're receiving lots of money and the other side is short of money, and that the exchange rates between them will naturally balance out. And so that you can have a balance. But it's not really a balance, because it ends up with somebody producing more than they're consuming at the end of the day. If not in one community, then the members of that community are suffering from exchange rate fluctuations when they want stability in order to trade. So there's another approach that says, no, you don't build automatic systems to force or encourage the balance of trade. You do politics. Politics is not the best word in some countries. What do we say? You do cooperation. You do negotiation. You do compromise. You work together with your trading partners to ensure a balance of trade between, you could think of it as individuals in a network or in a realm of exchange, or you could think of it as a balance of trade between countries. And countries work together and they say, well, we're not producing very much that you need. And the other country says, well, why don't we invest in you so you can produce what we need, and then we can get towards trade balance. So this is kind of a cooperative economics, you could call it. And the incentives for that to happen exist because of the commitment to balanced trade and the understanding that the economy is about exchanging stuff and not accumulating wealth. That's like a separate function.
I
wanted to make an observation.
Just for everyone to be informed, we're having a panel that will be a hybrid panel Fishbowl thing, as we worked out yesterday. Directly after that, on the topic of capitalist money versus money of the commons. That's the title, but we can just basically continue this conversation. I thought with you're one of the panelists.
Was I?
Yeah.
Okay.
Grace, you're also one of the panelists, and whoever else wants to be in the Fishbowl in the beginning, please take a seat there. Just so you know, we will
Actually, wanted to agree, and just before I close this, I actually think we're talking about almost the same thing, because you just essentially described the economy as a network and a political layer, which is a network formation game, where we update the network in order to create this kind of healthy balance. So I'm actually, the main, I think, reason why I feel the need to speak is because I feel at times that you're like characterizing terms as being not that, which at least I would hope to also be what you're describing. And so it sounds like more like semantics than it is an issue of whether it's like worldview or understanding of the structure of the economy.
Thank you. Let's not get into that here and now.
Okay, practical hook. This regards to the section we're talking about, let's say the issuance of new money through banks. I would recommend Perry Merlin's New Lombard Street, which is a book that analyzes first of all, the events of 2008 and the crisis of liquidity, and also on the lasting effects in the network of liquidity creation that have come after that. And while it's useful is because, well, the basic paradigm of, okay, this is the structure, how money comes to be, the governments, then the banks, and so on as a distributed system, it is actually already remarkably different. And it is also interesting to look at how it has also apoliticized itself by simply becoming engineering, and it's actually more liquidity. I'm using intentionally the word liquidity, rather than even currency issuance that is at stake, and that is the main question. That's very much worth the read, and it takes you a slightly different place of understanding of what's the fiat currency we're floating on. But I think, like, I would say one thing, your starting point on the medium of exchange. As I have problems with all of these sort of definitions of money, but this one can at least be used. But I think the use is to put emphasis on all the words. Medium of exchange. And what comes through the exchange, which is often kind of like thought after, it's the medium first, is that the exchange actually necessitates a network. And I think where your story was going, which is something I also agree with, is ultimately it's actually the network underneath which is the more fundamental. The token is simply a symptom upon the cause of the network. And hearing your critique, which I think I, on rough parts, agree with, upon token, is precisely this. Token is actually dependent on reflecting the qualities of the network and simply works as an instrument. And concentrating on the token itself only makes you blind to the actual fundamentals that are producing the effects of the token, which the token is merely mediating, not the source.
So the focus on the token, I call it totenomics.
Yeah.
Because the token is almost a totemic object.
Yes.
And you look at the token and you're distracted from the economic network underneath, the values of which are reflected in that token and which the token exists only to serve. Yes. Sorry, Angela next. Did you want to say something, Angela?
Yes. I was just thinking of, okay.
Hey guys, I'm sorry, guys in the back. Can we take the conversation out of the room, please?
You somehow close to the question, who to issue new medium of exchange, and how does this relate to modern monetary theory to say, okay, should we go back to the governments?
So just briefly, there's a lot of theory and politics around who can and who should issue the medium of exchange. In my example, it was one of the producers, because that's what I'm interested in. But in the same way, it could be the government. The government could issue the medium of exchange because their contract is do these things for us, like provide services, and this money, we will accept it back in taxes at the point of a gun, if necessary. So you know that that money is kind of backed by the goods and services that it was issued to create. So the government can create that closed loop, but they kind of don't because they've privatized the whole process. And so the contract with the bank is then very different. When the bank issues the credit, it says, we have a monopoly on the issuance of credit, you can't do it, no one gives a shit about your credit, nobody knows who you are, we are the bank, we're backed by the government, we're backed by deposit insurance, we've got a $50 million reserve here that was required, and we have a license to issue credit that the government will honour. You can pay tax with bank credit. So the deal is that you need some credit, you don't issue it, you go to the bank and say to the bank, will you issue credit on my behalf? And that credit will have legal tender value. And the bank says yes, but it will cost you. And so what the bank does when it issues the credit, it makes an accounting entry and charges you interest for this privilege. It kind of works, except when the bank gets carried away, because it's their business model to issue as much credit as they can and live off the interest. So they're motivated not to think about how much credit does the economy need this year. They're motivated to think about how can we increase our profits by issuing more credit and going closer and closer to that line where one day the economy will wobble and we won't have enough cash to pay out. And so that's the basis on which the economy works at the moment. And it means the banks are always kind of bending and breaking and rewriting the law to enable them to take more and more risk or get away with it or issue temporary money which becomes permanent.
I think what you just said perfectly introduces the next panel.
Yes.
Idea of private money based on state power, backed by state power.
That was my intention.
Thank you very much. Great introduction.
So I want to wrap up by saying that these fundamentals of tokenomics, which we have covered, are really only an introduction to what I really want to tell you, which is more about mutual credit and credit commons, because the credit theory of money is an alternative to the commodity theory of money, and it supports different interests and it has different mechanisms and it has different problems and paradoxes. And so as currency designers or token engineers, you need to have credit theory of money and mutual credit in your toolkit. And you need to know when to apply credit theory of money, mutual credit, or a more asset-only kind of token. So the Credit Commons is an attempt to resolve some of the problems of credit money and mutual credit. The biggest problem of mutual credit is scaling it, because it depends on trust within the circle. You make a circle of people who basically know each other or trust each other, they can have liquidity between themselves, but then what does that mean in the rest of the world? And the Credit Commons is a scaling solution, so you can have all of those circles trading with each other. But we're not going to get into that now. That was just an introduction to the paradigm. Talk to me privately. That's what I'm here for this week, to help all you guys explode your brains. And it takes a lot of talking and understanding and head fucking to get from the commodity money paradigm to the credit money paradigm, and then to see them side by side. And it's really essential that the discipline of token engineering embraces this, because otherwise, to me, it just seems like ways to design shitcoins that covers up the shit. Apologies to Angela.
Don't underrate the token engineers. Probably you didn't met many of them.
I didn't meet them. I know that their intentions are honourable.
I just had one last question.
Yeah.
So you were talking about production and consumption.
Yeah.
I can't produce as much because I'm too busy doing care work. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to hear you riff a bit on the invisible economy and things that are not as quantified in these systems.
Yeah.
How can we address?
Okay, well, I'm speaking as an accountant, and I'm not saying what things you should be accounting for. Of course, the care economy is valuable. Of course, it produces workers for the capitalist system. Of course, carers and mothers should have their needs met, and what they do should be considered as part of an exchange, either within the family circle or within a community circle or within the wider economy. That's not my area. I'm saying how we need to do accounting. We're passing all these units around. Where do the units come from? What do they mean? And critically, where do they go? Where do they end up? So I'm super specialist. I know about all those things. I don't have anything special to say in that area, okay?
I just wanted to at least voice
Yes.
it while we're speaking
Yes.
of injustices and inequalities.
Yes.
As it's a huge...
And when I'm doing my activism, I'm talking to the producers because I want them to issue the next money.
I think there are very obvious reasons why women's work is not accounted for. Because if you start giving parenting points or love points,
Yeah.
that's called prostitution,
Well, that's what, yeah,
right?
that's-
And so you can't do it that way.
Maybe that's the introduction to the next session. Do you want to come up?
Of course, you are having. Was great.
Thank you.
You see the program, there is another mini panel on workers, so I am listening.
Next to you, because, I don't know why. What is the, do you want to say?
Tokens idea as well.
What is the fee for?
Subject.
Subject
Money.
is
Introduce us.
money versus money for the commons. I would just like to have some of the autonomists here for that.
Can you tell everybody why we're talking about this?
Yeah, just give us an introduction of why we're talking about it so we can not go off on whatever else it is. Because I can
And
definitely
then-
talk about money as the commons.
And then keep us and them on topic, right? It's your job.
Or have a moderator.
Or call somebody else to do
Is
it.
there a panel moderator? Well, if it's not what you want to do, don't do it, but like, you know. Well, then who's good at moderating?
I appreciate it. Great talk. I didn't mean to come off as critical. I think the main thing that like kind of dug at me a bit, just so that you understand, in crypto writ large, all of the criticisms you're levying within the community of people who are largely, token engineers, are largely levying the very criticisms you're levying against crypto writ large. So what ended up happening, at least to my ear, and I know many people here who agree with much of what you said, you were kind of lumping the group, levying that criticism on this group, and you were lumping us in here and standing here and saying these things. And so that's why I was saying it's sort of semantic, because many of us do in fact know about networks and sort of producing, consuming issues with accumulation, like mutual credit, and that.
Been in that enough.
Because you're right, because there's a ton of noise here. This is really noisy. These people work hard in the shadows. A lot of them are here, some of them are not. And the main thing here that I was trying to get at was not to so much argue with you, but to just kind of make sure that people don't feel, I don't know, like kind of put down or have the terms that they use to identify themselves, making these criticisms against the broader crypto group.
What would be good if we're having a dynamically co-creating agenda is to say, well, now we've got that out of the way, what's really going on here?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And to be honest, you demonstrated the thing that I think is most critical, which is, to Tekno's point as well, the network structure produces a ton of inequality, and the mutual credit systems can really help because they allow you to trade and define value more locally. I mean, the only thing that I was asking about with the narratives around the tokens is kind of what you then called a totem, is what we use the word token to be, like a representation of something. And in fact, this Theo kept asking the very thing that we highlight, which is what matters is whether it represents something that I could reasonably expect my local circle of needs to be fulfilled by. And if it does that, it doesn't quite matter what the object was. It matters that I can reliably recover the things that I need in my local prosumption graph. And like, I think it's critical, and I think you're right, like a lot of injustice in the world comes from the fact that those graphs are really uneven. And it doesn't mean they have a perfect mathematical evener, it just means that we're continuously playing a game that reforms the graph to try to make it more equitable, feel fair.
Why don't you give a 15-minute presentation on what's happening in tokenomics that isn't characterized by me?
There's no way that somebody in this room.
I lumped it all together. Unfairly, because I'm an outsider.
That's fair, and I didn't mean to say like that's the reason I spoke up, right? Because I was just trying to
speak in defense of tokenomics.
So does somebody want to?
Yes.
Kind of
interchangeable.
Are we continuing?
Yes. I'm going to get out of your way.
Okay.
Do your panel. That's really all I wanted to share. Was just that like I'm sensitive to the group of people who work really hard in varying degrees of knowledge and defense.
The room is ready. We can go upstairs.
But you were characterizing in a way that pushed them into the group that they're really trying to improve and fix and bring some of this knowledge.
That's the sort of stuff we're here to discuss. So, raise it. Think of a presentation. Do you do presentations?
I think I do. I mean, to be honest with you, one of my biggest challenges is that I have difficulty code switching into the right level of language for this group. Like, for example, no joke, my literal PhD work was on conserved net flow, multi-commodity conserved net flows, like solving the sort of circumstances and conditions under which things can be equilibrated, like accumulations and
in economics.
Well, it's not. It was. I'm a systems engineer, so I studied under a guy named Ali Jabbabai. I said Penn, but he's the director of sociotechnics at MIT. He's actually a civil engineering department there. So there's this thing, at least in my worldview, which as you heard yesterday, where I'm trying to bring a civil engineering mindset to the problem of making healthy economic infrastructures. I think mutual credit is a phenomenal system that provides much higher improvement in lived experience of the ability to exchange and find local balance. There are still large, especially higher order net imbalances, which create a lot of injustices. But my challenge ends up being that I can communicate pretty well about ethical and ideological things in this kind of forum, but because my formal training is almost entirely mathematical, like to explain, it's one thing for me to understand immediately that network cycles matter.
Making excuses.
I'm happy to do a presentation. What I was going to say is you have a skill that involves like reducing the concept you're explaining to a stylized simulation, and I'm like, it's sort of both really effective and challenging at the same time because I can.
We'll have a translator.
Yeah, definitely.
I'll translate for you.
All the time. Yeah, cool. No, I want to get
whatever format we want.
Yeah. So maybe a productive thing to do would be to have a less antagonistic sounding discussion of this phenomenon in a way that if I express something and it's a little too, it gets sort of repeated as like you can interpret that like this kind of thing, because I actually really think that we're saying almost exactly the same stuff.
You mean you need softening?
Yeah, oh really?
Not detechnicalizing.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Well, I think if you're speaking to a room full of people and you're too strident in your statements, they will pick you up on it. It's a conversation. So maybe you don't even need a translator.
I mean, to some extent, it may be just practice engaging with audiences is different.
It takes a lot of practice, for me anyway, to relax in front of the audience and be able to think about what I'm saying.
Cool. So I'm with you there.
The only reason I could do this is because I've now talked to everybody in the room and I'm not shy anymore.
Yeah.
I'm confident in what I have to say and in their forgiveness.
What I thought this would be, I would not be the moderator because
like I'm extremely comfortable at a technical conference. I've taught graduate school. Like thinking isn't the issue. The issue is just learning how to communicate with the particular audience that I'm interacting with and finding the right level of engagement with them.
Okay, but you've been talking to these people for a full day now.
Oh, I do great on a one-on-one basis because I can code switch into the individual. I can find a channel that works with someone.
So do that.
With everyone at the same time?
Yes.
Okay. That's where it gets hard for me.
Just think, you're developing a mode of talking to these people. Even before you talk to them, you've got some expectation of where they are. So just take the average of all the conversations you've had. Dumb it down a bit. It's a necessary skill.
I have some space over the course of the week, so maybe I'll make a point of coming back to the challenge of the networks, and actually the very real fact that mutual credit systems are one of the best solutions that I've seen that actually, at least locally, create.
I want to hear that. I want to hear it from up here in that direction.
Man, once you get
I'm a
Z
big
started.
mutual credit advocate. That's all I ever do or talk about. And read the Credit Commons white paper.
I will. And the main thing though is, just to be clear, like the reason I like it is because I like the idea of it. It's because it's the best thing that I've seen for dealing with the underlying structural problem associated with that graph.
Cybernetics.
Yeah.
The way that Park Bench
Theo is with you on that. Do you know him?
We talked for a while. I sent him some, or gave him some references to relevant network science papers and stuff. That's basically.
When you feel like
you might like to join a discussion group we have online every 2 weeks. We go deep into these questions. Theo's part of it.
I'll find out from him.
There's one coming up next Tuesday, I think.
And
Tuesday.
now,
I think
for a
I'm
word
lecturing at the VU on
from
Tuesday,
our
but maybe the one.
And it's recorded as well.
I sponsored
no, for a word from our documentarian.
I just want to make a announcement.
All right.
So as you guys know, we're making a documentary of the event, and what we want to do for try to today is get everyone to introduce themselves and just explain briefly why you decided to come to this conference. We're giving 2 minutes maximum. If you do a little bit less, that's great. If you do a little bit more, try to end it. We're going to try to time it to 2 minutes, so think about how you want to introduce yourself, and then, the reason why you came, which I guess you know, hopefully at this point. Where is that? Yeah, it's going to be, we're going to try to get people in like small groups, I guess, and then we're going to go upstairs. It's in my room, but we have it set up with like the cameras and everything, and all the lights. So I just need to check with the guy doing the camera to make sure that everything is set, and then I may start pulling you guys and kidnapping you to come up and give your introduction. So the hope is to get everyone to do that. And then, of course, part of the documentary as well, we want to do longer or like shorter interviews with some people. We can't do everyone, of course, but so I may tap you on the shoulder and ask you if you want to do that. So you guys are aware.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And I want to open this Fishbowl park bench. Apparently it is.
I don't know. Depends on what. That's Fishbowl.
Is it Fishbowl? Okay.
Park bench is more fishbowl.
I need a definition of fishbowl after yesterday's very confusing experience.
Let's call it a discussion.
And you come up and down when you feel it's,
Right.
when you
Wh-
feel
whenever
ready,
there's
you
a
go.
check, you can come up and take that space, and whenever you feel you've said your part, or you want to leave space for others, you go back into the audience.
And how does moderation work?
Moderation
Your moderators
is
up here.
Two moderators.
Two moderators that will interrupt you when you go off topic.
These discussions are very meandering.
Yeah.
We'll
Keep
work
it on
together
topic.
to keep it on
Super
point.
happy about
Are
that.
we doing like the formal fishbowl format,
It
where
is
like
going
the
to
person
be-
who's been sitting there the longest?
That's park bench.
That's the part.
That's a park bench. We're not going to be kicking people off. If you have something to say, stay. If you don't, leave. And make sure there's room for everyone's voice.
Can we hear from the moderators what it is we're actually talking about?
I feel like he's going to introduce what he wants us to talk about.
the topic, because I set the title.
Okay.
So the title of the formerly
Can we all
panel.
bring our attention up, please? Can we all bring our attention up? Thank you.
Guys, please, if you have conversations, please finish them outside. Thank
Those
you.
are my friends.
Is it the park bench?
So,
The cameraman says he would like, is
Oh, I
that
see.
good?
is. Are we good?
Yeah.
Yeah, now we're good. Title of the panel, formal panel of the Fishbowl is capitalist money versus money of the commons. The idea behind that was simple. There are multiple critiques of capitalist money as is. We have already heard an introduction to that. Basically, private issuance backed by state power, scarcity of medium of exchange, the imposition of store of value on that medium of exchange, thus more scarcity and hoarding. At the same time, there are multiple ideas for a money of the commons or multiple monies of the commons around in the crypto space and in other spaces as well. I thought it would be good to first go a bit deeper onto what are actually the problems a capitalist money is, or fiat money currently is causing for economies. And the other question would be, what different ideas of a money of the commons are around? What does a money of the commons have to fulfill? How would it, for example, relate to care work as well? That was after that. And there are several different approaches. For example, Disco is, well, they're not really issuing money. They're, however, trying to account for care work. There are also experiments with cryptocurrency in, for example, in Macau, that is a squat in Milano. And they have been doing that since 2014-15 with Common Coin. They also have universal basic income. We also have, we hear notions of a money of the commons or a post-capitalist monetary system in the context of a billion tokens, basically every good being tokenized and every good having its own monetary reflection. Whether that makes sense or not, I think could also be a matter of discussion. If anyone wants to stand up for that part, I figure would be the token engineers around. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I was hoping for participation from Italy, from either Andrea Fumagalli or other people from Macau. Unfortunately, Andrea has a conference that he's attending, and Macau were pretty busy with COVID last time I talked to them, so we do not have anyone here from them this year. I do hope next year. And yeah, thanks to our panelists slash Fishbowl, initial Fishbowl participation. Yeah, let's get started.
Maybe I'll start off, and there may be a question in there that we can carry on to the panel. So I was speaking with Michel Bauwens sometime this past year, and we were speaking about sort of this hesitancy to use money in the commons. There's this assumption, this trauma, that we are always talking about extractive, cold money. And I introduced the concept to him of warm money as money that, you know, is issued under any of these other paradigms, mutual credit, producer credit, et cetera, et cetera. And he really took to that sort of cold money, warm money paradigm because it opened up the difference in assumptions we've talked about this a few times over the past couple of days, that, you know, the form of money we are default talking about is the kind of money that exists predominantly in the world today, but as we are all here discussing these other forms, can these two forms interact? Or, I mean, what happens when you mix cold water and warm water? I mean, it kind of becomes lukewarm and then it probably cools off, entropy, whatever, so you have this like, can cold money and warm money coexist? How do we allow for different types of currencies to intermingle without losing the value that some produce that others may extract?
So Matthew talked about what money does and the definition of money, and when you really think about what is the function of money, this idea of even store of value or exchange of value is a little random, because how do you value something? And we're having a conversation here, and there's some value in this conversation, and there's no money in the conversation. And when I have people look at what do you do for money versus what do you do that it's not a money generating activity, it's almost random. It's just almost random if people just list in their life. And so it's like there's this idea that money is representing value, but I don't think that's what it's doing. And so what I prefer to say that money does is reallocation of resources. And when you think about money as reallocation of resource, then you can get very clear about this extractive thing, right? Like somebody reallocated a resource, so I've got this on my body, right? Now, what is the resource they reallocated, and which resources got reallocated when I put money into something? That's starting to be an interesting question. Then you start thinking, okay, wait a second. When I'm using this money, which resources am I reallocating? And that's an interesting way of thinking about it. It's only one of the functions of money. Money is a coordination mechanism. We're using money as appreciation, right? When we say we want to incentivize somebody, incentivizing somebody, it might be because they need some basic need, and that's money. Or it might be because they feel appreciation. If you dish praise, right? It's like, oh, I got praise. But if you dish too much praise, like if I got praise every hour, it would lose any meaning. Right? So you can only incentivize something like appreciation if it's sincere and not too frequent. So it's very interesting when we think about this, right? What are we using money for? The problems with capitalist money that, you know, Felix mentioned, there's a couple of things. And one is just this idea, capitalism, right? That money should render money, interest-bearing money versus demurrage. This is a huge problem when you think